Hello, everybody. Hello. Well, you guys see the thumbnail. We see the thumbnail, and this is our content. White privilege. Wow. So the moment those two words come out of somebody's mouth, right, half the country immediately stops listening to it. Some people hear those words and think they're being called a racist. Other people hear those words and think someone is saying white people have never struggled. That's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about something much more specific. I'm talking about privilege that eventually becomes entitlement. I'm talking about reaching a point where someone believes the rules don't apply to them the way they apply to everybody else. Now, before I explain why I believe that, I want you to watch something. Just watch this.
Commander Badu, you guys got to keep it down.
In 1900, the world was 30% white. Fast forward 125 years, we are down to 7%. The Islamification of Europe is particularly aimed at the destruction of white people. The Islamification of America is aiming to meet the same goal. Our people, white Christian, European, Western civilization, we built the arts. We built the Colosseum. We have ran the world into the industrial age. And now, this people here, the Muslim community, is looking to drag us back. They're looking to oppress women, oppress homosexuals. They're looking to destroy everything that makes America great. President Trump, send ICE into Dearborn. These people have overstayed their visas. They're H-1B chain migration invaders, and they have come to this country to destroy our way of life. We know exactly your laws in your book about lying to our faces, pretending to be Americans, wearing your suits. But that doesn't happen anywhere else where you guys are in charge. There are 53 Muslim majority countries, and in all of them, it is tyranny, destruction, it is shithole living. We have to call it what it is. You guys don't live.
See, I wanted you to see that before I said another word, because that's where this entire conversation begins. When I watch Jake Lang, I don't see a conservative activist. I see somebody who, in my opinion, carries himself with an extraordinary level of confidence. I'm not talking about confidence in his political beliefs. I'm talking about confidence that he can continue pushing boundaries, continue provoking people, continue placing himself in controversial situations, and somehow he believes everything is eventually going to work itself out. That caught my attention, that he would go to certain places and do what he did. Then I started asking myself a question. Where does that level of confidence come from? Where does his level of confidence come from? Okay? Because confidence doesn't just appear overnight. People develop confidence because of what they've experienced. People develop confidence because life teaches them certain lessons. Sometimes those lessons are positive and sometimes they're dangerous. That's why I started thinking about the difference between privilege and enlightenment, entitlement. To me, privilege isn't about money. It's not about growing up rich. It's not And I'm not saying every white person has an easy life. I don't believe any of that. I believe privilege is revealed when something goes wrong. I believe privilege becomes visible when someone crosses a line and we watch what happens next. Who gets the benefit of the doubt? Who gets another chance? Who gets political support? Who gets described as misunderstood instead of dangerous? Who gets grace? Because I think grace is one of the clearest forms of privilege that exists. Not everyone receives it equally. And when someone receives enough grace over a long enough period of time, I believe something begins to change. Privilege slowly becomes entitlement. Entitlement is the expectation that you'll receive the same grace the next time. Entitlement is believing the consequences will somehow be different for you. Entitlement is believing someone will eventually step in and protect you. That's the argument I'm making today. I'm going to use Jake Lang as my first example. Then I'm going to show you why I believe Chud the Builder fits the same pattern. Finally, I'm going to compare both of them to Moye, because I think the comparison raises an important question. Moye is a Black BLM activist. Okay? I think the comparison raises an important question about grace, accountability, and who receives public support in America. You may not agree with every conclusion I reach. I don't care. That's okay. What I want you to do is watch the evidence with me. Watch the clips. Look at the photographs. Listen to the interviews. Then decide for yourself whether you've been looking at isolated incidents or whether you've been looking at a pattern. Because I don't believe this conversation is really about Jake Lang. I think Jake Lang is the example. He's the exhibit A. The real conversation is about what happens when privilege becomes entitlement, and entitlement becomes so normal that the person exercising it no longer recognizes it. Jake Lang, this is who we're talking about. Now that you've heard my definition, let's talk about the man who made me think about this differently. Jake Lang didn't become famous because he wrote a book or ran the office. He became nationally known because of January 6th. According to prosecutors, he assaulted police officers during the attack on the United States Capitol. He denied the government's characterization of his conduct, but there's no dispute that he became one of the most recognizable January 6th defendants. He spent years in jail awaiting trial, built a national following, appeared on conservative media, and after Donald Trump returned to office, he was among the January 6th defendants who received a presidential pardon. Those are the facts. Now let's move beyond the facts and talk about what I see. Let me pull up this picture here. We're going to pull up this picture right here. Uno momento, guys. Where's it at? Okay. Here we go. I'm just going to show the footage. We're just going to show the footage. You have to look at the picture for a second. Forget about politics. Forget about Republican. Forget about Democrat. Forget who you voted for. Just look at what you're seeing. Okay? Just look at what you're seeing. Most Americans would never even consider climbing the United States Capitol during a riot. Most people would immediately think about getting arrested, losing their job, embarrassing their family, or spending years fighting criminal charges. Most people would see this building, would see the Capitol building, and think, I need to get as far away from this as possible when they see all those people charging towards the United States Capitol. Jake Lang made a different decision. That decision by itself doesn't prove entitlement. What interests me is everything that happened afterward. Okay? After years of criminal charges, after years of media attention, after becoming one of the faces of January 6th, I would expect someone to become quieter. I would expect someone to become more reflective of their behavior. I would expect someone to become careful about every public appearance because they understand how quickly life can change for them. That's not what I see. I see someone who continues putting himself in front of the cameras. Okay? That's what I see. I see someone who continues traveling around the country. I see someone who continues speaking with complete and utter confidence. That's what caught my attention. Then I started asking myself another question. Where does this confidence come from? Where does Jake Lang think this comes from, or this comes from Jake Lang? Because confidence doesn't exist in a vacuum. Confidence comes from experience. People behave based on what life has taught them. If every time someone pushes a boundary, they receive applause instead of criticism, that teaches them something. If every time someone creates a controversy, their audience grows larger, that teaches them something. If powerful political figures publicly defend them instead of distancing themselves from them, that teaches that person something. Eventually, those lessons become expectations. That's why I separate privilege from entitlement. Privilege is the possibility that the system, the public, or influential people may extend grace to you. Entitlement is what happens after you've experienced that grace enough times that you begin to expect it. Let me show another clip. Let me show this.
Far-right influencer and pardoned January 6th rioter Jake Lang walking out of Collin County Jail Tuesday after multiple arrests this month related to the Carmelo Anthony trial.
Why am I the one being mistreated by the justice system?
Lang's most recent charge, felony terroristic threat. According to an arrest warrant affidavit obtained by Fox 4, Lang was identified on video outside Anthony's trial, saying he'd kill Carmelo Anthony with a shot to the head. Lang was charged by the Texas Department of Public Safety. It was working with the Texas Fusion Center, proactively monitoring threats seen on social media related to the trial.
The judicial tyrants have gone drunk with power.
This wasn't a, hey, if I see you outside, we can tangle. It was I'm going to take a headshot and end it right there. And then he, according to the PC affidavit, doubled down.
Criminal defense attorney and former Collin County prosecutor Rebecca Pearlstein is not connected to this case. A judge reduced Lang's $1 million bond to $250,000. That initial $1 million bond is higher than some people receive for a murder charge. But Pearlstein says Lang's past likely plays a role.
He had been told to stay away from the Collin County courthouse.
On June 2nd, Lang was charged.
Right. So watch the confidence of this man. Watch the certainty of this man. I'm not asking you whether you agree with his politics. I'm asking you to pay attention to how he carries himself. In my opinion, he doesn't sound like someone who believes he crossed the line. He sounds like someone who believes history is going to prove him right. That mindset fascinates me because once someone becomes convinced that they're always on the right side of history, accountability becomes much easier to dismiss. Criticism becomes persecution. Arrest becomes political. All of these things I've heard from this man. Prosecution becomes evidence of corruption. That's what concerns me. Now, let me make something very, very clear. I'm not saying Jake Lang believes these things because he's white. I'm saying I believe his public behavior reflects a level of confidence that was reinforced over time. Then I ask another question. What reinforced it? Was it the media? Was it fundraising? Was it interviews? Was it supporters? Was it years of hearing that he and other January 6th defendants were political prisoners instead of criminals? Was it eventually receiving a presidential pardon? I can't answer that with certainty, but I can tell you what I think. I think all of these things matter. I think human beings learn from reinforcement. Reward behavior and you usually get more of it. Excuse behavior and you usually get more of it. Celebrate behavior and you always get more of it. That's why I don't believe Jake Lang is simply one man's story. I believe he's an example of what can happen when confidence is repeatedly rewarded until it becomes entitlement. Now I want to show you another example because Jake Lang ain't the only person who made me start thinking this way. Chud the Builder. If Jake Lang was the first example, that made me start thinking differently about privilege and entitlement. Chud the Builder was the second example that convinced me I wasn't looking at an isolated case. These are two different men. They have different personalities. They have different background. They became known for different reasons. But when I watched them over time, I noticed something they had in common. Neither one appeared to be afraid of the consequences. That's what caught my attention, because fear is what usually keeps people from crossing these lines. Fear of losing freedom, reputation, career, family. Fear causes most people to stop and think before they act. When I watched Chud the Builder, I didn't see much hesitation for the nonsense that he pulled. I saw someone who appeared comfortable becoming increasingly confrontational. I saw someone who continued saying things that most people wouldn't say in public. I saw someone who continued escalating his conduct until, according to prosecutors, that conduct crossed into criminal behavior. Okay, let me show you. Let me show you this. Let me put this one up there.
You follow?
Hold on. Let me take this one off. Hold on. Remove. Here we go.
We got 18 rounds for you. We ain't got nothing else. Don't follow me in my truck. I bet you won't follow me in my truck. Come on. Look at him. Ooga booga. Ooh ah ah. Ooh ah ah. Look at these chimp.
Hey y'all, good morning. What's good?
So now before somebody misunderstands what I'm saying, let me be clear. I'm not talking about conservative politics, so don't get in my comment section saying garbage. I'm not talking about free speech. People have every right to support Donald Trump. People have every right to support the Democrats. People have every right to hold opinions I completely disagree with. That's not the issue. The issue is believing that because you're fighting for what you think is right, the normal rules of accountability somehow become optional to you. That's a very different conversation. Very different conversation. Okay? Let me play this clip. Okay.
Guy, got your body cam on? No? I want to know what y'all were talking about before I walked over here. You've been standing here the whole time in your life. Just get a napkin.
I'll bring you one.
Can you like wet it a little bit? Is there any way, or just get like a cup of water or something?
Yeah, I'll bring you one.
It's all over the fucking hat.
I'll bring you one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to like disappear before y'all, in the night and whatnot. But yo, y'all can I get in his position? I'm very interested in like working for you.
Well, bro's got a fucking solid position. He's trying to steal your job.
No, not even that. Not even
But like, just like a secondary one?
Yeah, basically.
We could have two cameras.
I shoot at JBJ's, Whiskey Row, and Whiskey D's.
It would be insane if I had a black dude follow and help him.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that would be kind of wild. Every time I watch this clip, I ask myself the same question. What convinced him that this was a good idea? What made you think this was a good idea and it would not backfire on you? What would make that? What would make you wake up and say, I'm going to do that? Seriously, think about that. Most people don't suddenly become this bold. Behavior like this develops over time. People learn what they can get away with, what they can create, what consequences come, who will defend them, who will excuse them, who will raise money for them. People learn who can call them heroes instead of telling them they need to stop. That's how entitlement grows. It doesn't happen in one day. It happens after years of reinforcement. Now, think about what happened politically after January 6th. For years, many Republican politicians described January 6th defendants as political prisoners. Conservative media personalities interviewed them. Supporters donated to them. President Trump returned to office and then pardoned them. Again, I'm not arguing whether people agree or disagree with those pardons. I'm asking a different question. What message does that send? Because whether people realize it or not, public figures teach lessons. When someone receives praise after crossing a line, other people notice that. When someone receives political protection after crossing a line, people notice that. When someone becomes famous after crossing that line, other people notice. That's how culture changes. People imitate behavior they see rewarded. That's human nature. Now let me ask another question. Would Chud the Builder have continued becoming more provocative if every time he crossed that line, calling people the N-word, calling chimps, blah, blah, blah? Would he have continued becoming more provocative if every time he crossed that line, the people around him said, stop it? Maybe, Maybe not. None of us can ever know. But I do know this one thing. Positive reinforcement changes behavior. Negative reinforcement changes behavior. Human beings respond to incentives. That's why I believe political leaders have such enormous responsibility, because people are always watching what leaders reward. They're always watching what leaders excuse. They're always watching what leaders condemn. When the message becomes, as long as you're on my side, I'll defend you, accountability starts becoming conditional. That's dangerous, because accountability shouldn't depend on politics. It shouldn't depend on race, ideology, or conduct. That's the principle I'm defending. That's why I believe Jake Lang and Chud the Builder belong in the same conversation. Not because they're identical, not because they committed the same acts, but because, in my opinion, both demonstrate what happens when confidence keeps getting reinforced until it becomes something much more dangerous. It becomes the belief that the rules apply differently to you than they do to everybody else. Now, I want to show you why I don't believe this conversation is complete without talking about someone whose experience took a very different path. Let's talk about Moye, the black, BLM, he was an activist. Now, I want to change the conversation because, let me put him on the stage. Hold on, let me take this one off. Put it on the stage, okay? This is Moye, okay? Up to this point, I've talked about Jake Lang and Chud the Builder. I call him the barber, but it's the builder. Some people are probably saying, TPP, those are just two individuals. You can't build an argument about white privilege around two people. Fair enough. Fair enough. But people are always talking about all black people do this and all black people commit crime and all black people do everything else. They don't mind putting me in the same category as the ghetto ratchet like dumb Keisha down the street. But they want to have a problem when we put them in the category with pedophiles and rapists and all those other good things, right? But I digress. Okay, fair enough. So let's compare them to someone else. Let's compare these two, Chud Barber and Jake Lang, to something. Let's talk about Moye. He became nationally known in Charleston because he openly confronted white supremacists and Confederate supporters. He wasn't a quiet actor. He wasn't trying to make everyone comfortable. He was outspoken, confrontational, unapologetic about what he believed. Whether you agree with everything he said, it's not really the point I'm making. The point I'm making is what happened after he became a public figure. Okay? Let me keep going with this picture. When I think about him, I don't remember seeing elected officials from either political party building a national movement around him. I don't remember members of Congress going on television defending him. I don't remember conservative media inviting him on to explain his side of the story. I don't remember any of that, right? Let me go back to him. Okay. I don't remember any of that. I don't remember anybody raising money for him or anything. I don't remember a president talking about him as someone who had to be treated fairly. I don't remember any of that. Now compare that to Jake Lang. Jake Lang became one of the faces of January 6th. He received interviews, donations, political support. Many influential Republicans publicly defended January 6th defendants, arguing they had been treated unfairly. President Trump eventually pardoned many of the January 6ers after he returned to office. Those things happen. Now, here's my question. Why? Not why did people support Jake Lang politically. I understand why supporters defended someone they believe was on their side. My question is much bigger. Why does one activist become a political martyr while another activist simply becomes another criminal defendant? Because that's what I keep coming back to. We keep coming back to grace. I think grace is one of the most overlooked forms of privilege in America. Grace is what people extend after you've already crossed the line. Grace says, let's hear his side. Grace says, maybe there's another side to the story. Grace says he deserves another chance. He's not a bad person. The question isn't whether grace exists. The question is who receives it. Because I don't believe everyone receives the same grace. That's where my opinion begins. I believe some people begin life with a larger margin for error than other people. I believe some people can make bigger mistakes before society permanently defines them by those mistakes. I believe some people receive more opportunities to explain themselves. I believe some people receive more political protection, more public sympathy, more second chances. And I believe race is sometimes one of those factors. Not always, but sometimes. That's why I don't define white privilege the way many people do. I don't define it as wealth, happiness. I don't define it as never struggling. I define it as having a larger margin for error. That's the phrase I think best explains what I'm talking about. A larger margin for error. Because if two people make terrible decisions, but one person receives understanding while the other person receives condemnation, those experiences teach different lessons. Take, for example, the Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf situation. Both of them received, what are those, GoFundMes? When Carmelo Anthony's family received GoFundMes, it was, they didn't need no money. They don't need no money. They ain't gonna do nothing but spend it. They ain't gonna do nothing but spend it on houses, cars, Cadillacs, spend it. They just recklessly spent it. I haven't heard one person ask what Austin Metcalf's family did with their GoFundMe money. I haven't heard one thing about what they did with their money. It's called grace, a larger margin for error. Because if two people make terrible decisions, but one person receives understanding while the other person receives condemnation, those experiences teach different lessons. One lesson says, be careful. The other lesson says, you'll probably be okay. That's why I believe privilege eventually becomes entitlement. People don't wake up feeling entitled. They learn it. They learn it from experience. They learn it from watching who gets defended. They learn it from watching who gets another chance. They learn it from watching who powerful people decide is worth saving. And once someone learns that lesson often enough, they stop wondering whether the rules apply to them. They start assuming the rules will bend. That's why I believe this is what happened to Jake Lang. That's what I believe I saw developing with Chud the Builder. And that's why I think comparing these examples with Moye is important, because the comparison isn't really about the men themselves. The comparison is about the grace that surrounds them. And in my opinion, that's where privilege becomes visible. Now let's take this one step further, because I think the real question ain't about whether privilege exists. The real question is what happens to a country when entitlement starts replacing accountability. One of the reasons I want to make this video is because I think too many conversations about race stop before people ask the most important question. Where does entitlement come from? Nobody's born believing the rules don't apply to them. Nobody's born believing they can say anything, do anything, provoke anybody, or challenge any institution without consequences. People learn that. They learn it from experience. They learn it from watching who gets rewarded, who gets protected. They learn it from watching who powerful people decide is worth defending. That's why I don't think this conversation is only about Jake Lang. I think Jake Lang is the result of something much bigger. I think Chud the Builder is another result of that same environment. And I think if we ignore that environment, then we're missing the entire story. Let's go back to January 6th for a minute. After the attack on the Capitol, there were Republicans who condemned it immediately. Immediately, boom, boom, boom. There were Republicans who said people who broke the law should be prosecuted. There were Republicans who said the violence was unacceptable. Then something changed. As time went on, more and more public figures began describing many January 6th defendants differently. They weren't being described as people who had committed crimes. They were being described as political prisoners. They were being described as victims. They were being described as patriots. That change matters. Words matter. The way leaders describe people matter, because people listen, supporters listen, future activists listen, young people listen. And if the message becomes these people didn't do anything wrong, then don't be surprised when somebody else decides to do the same thing. I think that's controversial. I think it's human nature. If children see bad behavior rewarded, they'll repeat it. Remember how you be cussing in front of your kid and your kid says the bad word and you like, where you learn that from? How you saying that? They learn that. That's exactly why leadership carries so much responsibility. Let me play this video. Uno momento, y'all. Hold on.
Hundreds of them.
Talk about how he was a
That's all I see. Regain your dignity. Regain your dignity. The black community has lost its godlessness. It's lost its God-fearing ability, and they have descended into degeneracy, prostitution, ball player worship, Cardi B worship, violence worship. This is the hallmarks of the black community. Fix it, and we will welcome you back into the American family. But until you fix it, you guys are invaders. Fix your children. Fix your children. Your children are brutalizing our children because they don't know how to keep their hands to themselves. He's got a scar on him from the fight he got.
Every time I watch Jake Lang speak, I ask myself one question. Does this sound like somebody who believes he made a terrible mistake on January 6th? Or does this sound like someone who believes history is going to vindicate him? I know what I hear. You may hear something else, but I hear certainty. I hear confidence. I hear someone who believes he is righteous. Then I ask another question. Would that confidence exist if years of political leaders had stood up and said, no, hell no, you're a criminal. January 6th was wrong. You crossed a line. Take accountability. Would that confidence be there if the Republicans had stood up and said, this is bullshit and you're a criminal? Maybe, maybe not. We'll never know. But I do know that leaders influence behavior. Now let's bring Chud the Builder back into the conversation. Okay. Hold on. No momento. Hold on. Do I get his name? Let me see. Put him on stage. Okay. This is Chud the Builder. Okay. Watch Chud the Builder. Don't just listen to what he says when you see a videotape of him. Watch how he says it. Watch the confidence. Watch the certainty. Watch the willingness to provoke. Then ask yourself another question. Where does somebody learn that level of comfort? Because I don't believe people suddenly become fearless. I think they become accustomed to believing there will always be another excuse. There will always be another defense. There will always be another explanation. That's why I keep using the word grace. Grace is a beautiful thing when it leads someone towards accountability. Grace becomes dangerous when it replaces accountability. There's a difference. If my child makes a mistake, I show grace, but I also should teach accountability. If I only offer grace and never accountability, I'm not helping that person. I'm teaching my child that consequences are optional. I think political movements can make that same mistake. Every political movement wants to protect its own people. Democrats do it. Republicans do it. The difference, in my opinion, is that the January 6th movement became something much larger than that. It became a loyalty test. If you criticize January 6th defendants, some people said you weren't a real conservative. If you defended it, you proved your loyalty. That's dangerous. Because once loyalty becomes more important than accountability, bad behavior becomes much harder to stop. Now, let me explain why I believe this connects directly to privilege. If enough influential people continue protecting someone after they've crossed serious lines, eventually a person begins to expect protection. That's entitlement. That's entitlement. That's why I don't think entitlement is simply an attitude. I think entitlement is learned behavior. It develops after enough experiences where someone discovers that the consequences weren't nearly as severe as they expected, so they continue to do it. That's why I believe privilege and entitlement are connected. Privilege creates the opportunity. Repeated grace reinforces the behavior. Eventually, the behavior becomes expectation. The expectation becomes entitlement. That's the progression I believe we watched over the past several years. The question isn't whether you agree with my conclusion. The question is whether you ever stop to ask how someone develops that level of confidence in the first place. Because I don't believe confidence like that appears out of nowhere. I believe it's taught, it's reinforced, and I believe that's exactly why this conversation matters. If you made it this far, you might be saying, TPP, I don't see white privilege. I've never seen white privilege. I don't know what white privilege is. I actually understand why a lot of people say that, okay? If you've never experienced something, you usually don't spend much time looking at it. If you never had asthma, you probably don't think much about air. If you've never used a wheelchair, you probably don't spend a lot of time noticing which buildings don't have wheelchair ramps. That doesn't make you a bad person. It just means your life experiences determine what you notice. Okay? I think the same thing happens with race. A lot of Black Americans notice things that many white Americans don't notice because our life experiences have been different. That doesn't automatically mean one person is lying. It doesn't automatically mean one person is right and the other person is wrong. It means they've experienced America differently. Now, let me explain why I think this matters. If I ask Jake Lang whether he believes he has white privilege, I would guess he'd probably say, no, oh no, I ain't got no privilege. No. I doubt Chud the Builder. I doubt Chud the Builder would describe himself as privileged either. Most people who benefit from privilege don't recognize it because privilege usually feels normal to the person experiencing it. That's why I don't ask people whether they think they're privileged. I watch their behavior. I watch the responses. I watch the outcomes. Those things tell me much more than someone's opinion of themselves. Think about it this way. Most people don't wake up in the morning saying, today I'm going to use my white privilege. That's not how it works. Privilege becomes visible when something goes wrong. Who gets another interview after crossing the line? Who gets another opportunity to explain themselves? Who gets supporters raising money for them? Who gets politicians publicly defending them? Who gets described as misunderstood? Who gets described as dangerous? Those are the questions I ask, because those answers tell me much more than political slogans ever could. Now I want to address something else. Whenever conversations like this happen, someone usually says, Black people get special treatment too. TPP, you're racist. You're racist talking about race. Black people sometimes do get special treatment. There are situations where affirmative action existed. There are diversity programs, scholarships, there's initiatives to correct historical wrongs. Those conversations are legitimate. People can debate whether those programs work or whether they should continue. That's not what this video is about. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about public grace. I'm talking about who receives the benefit of the doubt after crossing serious lines. I'm talking about those whose mistakes become their entire identity and whose mistakes become something people explain away. Those aren't the same conversations. That's why I chose the examples that I did. Jake Lang, Chud the Builder, and Muhiyidin Moye. I wasn't trying to compare identical legal cases. I was comparing something much bigger. I was comparing public responses, because I believe public responses teaches lessons. If people watch someone become famous after crossing serious lines, they learn something. If people watch someone become politically protected after crossing serious lines, they learn something. If people watch someone receiving endless opportunities to tell their side of the story while someone else is written off almost immediately, they learn something. That's how culture develops. Culture isn't created by speeches. Culture is created by what people reward. That's why I believe political rhetoric matters, media matters, public reaction matters. Every one of those things teaches somebody something. Now, here's the question I want to leave you with before we move into the conclusion. If tomorrow another activist decided to push the same boundaries that Jake Lang pushed, what lesson do you think they've learned from watching the last several years? Have they learned that there are consequences? Or have they learned that if enough influential people support them, those consequences might eventually disappear? I think that's one of the most important questions facing this country, because the answer doesn't just affect Jake Lang. It affects the next person who's watching. It affects the next activist deciding how far they're willing to go. It affects the next generation deciding whether accountability is something to respect or something to negotiate. That's why I believe this conversation is bigger than race. Race is a part of it. Politics is a part of it, but accountability is the real issue. Once accountability becomes negotiable, every institution in this country becomes weaker. That's why I believe we should All care, regardless of whether we're Democrats or Republicans, independent, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. Because when accountability stops being equal, justice eventually stops being equal too. Okay. As I started putting this video together, I realized something. I don't think privilege is the biggest problem. I think entitlement is. Privilege by itself doesn't force anybody to make bad decisions. Plenty of people grow up with advantages and never abuse them. Plenty of people are born into wealth and become generous, humble, and responsible adults. Plenty of people receive opportunities that other people never receive, and they spend the rest of their lives trying to help other people. Privilege doesn't automatically create bad behavior. Entitlement does. Entitlement is what happens when someone begins to believe they deserve something they haven't earned. Entitlement is believing the rules should bend for you because you think you're different. Entitlement is believing your cause is so righteous that your conduct doesn't matter. That's what worries me, because entitlement doesn't stay in one person. It spreads. When enough people begin believing accountability is optional, eventually the entire movement starts changing. Instead of asking, did this person do something wrong? People begin to ask, which side is he on? That's a dangerous question, because once loyalty becomes more important than conduct, justice starts changing. The same behavior gets judged differently depending on who's doing it. The same conduct gets explained away if it's committed by somebody on your side. That's exactly what I believe we've been watching. I'm not saying Democrats never do any of these things. They do. Republicans do it too. Human beings have always defended the people they agree with. The difference is that I believe we've reached a point where too many Americans no longer expect accountability from their own side. That's dangerous for everybody, because once you stop holding your own people accountable, you stop caring about accountability altogether. Let's go back to Jake Lang the last time. This is the last time we're going to talk about Jake Lang. Let me play this video. This is my last video.
Hey, back up. Do not impede me. Do not impede me. That's assault.
This is the moment anti-ICE protesters clashed with a prominent right-wing activist here in Minneapolis on Saturday. Less than 2 weeks after a surge of federal agents deployed to the city as part of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown.
Exactly 80 million Trump supporters voted for our president and for the agenda to sweep our nation of these migrants.
Jake Lang, who spent 4 years in prison for his role in the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th before being pardoned by President Trump, encouraged his followers to meet him in Minneapolis to support ICE and confront what he called a, quote, Muslim takeover in the city.
Let's go, Patriots! Jake Lang, God bless you.
Okay. Every time I hear him speak, I don't hear any kind of uncertainty. I don't hear regret. I don't hear any kind of regret. I don't hear someone questioning whether they made the right decisions on January 6th. I hear conviction, confidence, certainty. Now, maybe some people see courage. I see something different. I see a coward. I see someone who, in my opinion, believes he was justified from the very beginning. I believe years of public support reinforced that belief instead of challenging it. Then I think about Chud the Builder. Think about somebody who appeared to become increasingly comfortable saying and doing things that most people would never do publicly. Again, I ask myself the same question. What convinced him that the consequences would never come his way? Then I think about Moye. I think about how different the public conversation became. I think about who received grace. I think about who received political protection. I think about who became a symbol. That's when I realized this conversation isn't really about three men. They're examples. The real issue is whether America applies the same standard to everyone. Because if the answer is no, then we shouldn't be surprised when people start acting differently. Human beings respond to incentives. If bad behavior is rewarded, more bad behavior follows. That's why I believe leadership matters so much. Leaders don't just pass laws. They establish norms. They communicate what deserves condemnation. And millions of people are watching every single day. That's why I don't think this conversation ends with Jake Lang. It doesn't end with Chud the Builder or Moye. These stories will eventually be replaced in the news. I get that. The real question is whether the patterns change. Will we start to apply the same standards regardless of race? Will we start applying the same standards regardless of political party or ideology? Because if we don't, we're going to keep producing more people who believe the rules are negotiable. And once enough people believe that, the rule of law itself begins to lose its authority. That's the part that concerns me the most. not because of politics or race, but because no democracy can survive if accountability becomes something that depends on who you are, who you support, or who will defend you. I believe accountability has to become boring again. Take, for example, that dude that's running for Senate in Texas. That dude has done everything. What's his name? Ken Paxton. That dude has done everything illegal, shady, cheated on his wife, did everything, took bribes, you name it. He's done everything under the sun in Texas. And you Republicans hold him up like that's a badge of honor. It's a badge of shame that you would even vote for that person to be in the United States Senate. It's a badge of shame. No accountability. Just as long as they have an R by their name, no accountability. Okay? I want accountability to become boring again. I want it to be predictable, consistent. Okay? I don't want everybody to agree with me, but because I think America deserves an honest discussion about privilege, grace, entitlement, and accountability before the next Jake Lang, Chud the Builder, or the next controversial activist comes and brings this destructive symbol to our country, our nation. Okay? And this is the question I want to ask. This wasn't really about Jake Lang. I still believe that. I use Jake Lang because I think he's a visible example of something much bigger. I use Chud the Barber because I believe his story reinforces the same point. I use Moye because I wanted people to think about how differently public support, political protection, and public sympathy can be distributed. The real question of this video has never been those three men. The real subject is America. The real subject is accountability. The real subject is whether this country still believes the same rules should apply to everybody. Because if we don't believe that anymore, then we have much bigger problems than politics. We have a problem with justice. One of the things I've noticed over the last several years is that Americans have become very good at recognizing unfairness when it affects them. Affects you. They're not nearly as good at recognizing unfairness when it affects somebody else. Republicans complain about unfair treatment. Democrats complain about unfair treatment. Conservatives complain about double standards. Liberals complain about double standards. Everybody seems capable of recognizing selective accountability when it hurts their side. Very few people recognize it when their own side benefits from it. That's one of the reasons I wanted to make this video, because I don't think this conversation belongs only to Democrats. I don't think this conversation belongs to only Black Americans or white America. I think every American should care whether the standards are being applied evenly, because one day the unequal standard may benefit you. Right now, everybody's hurting, money-wise, food-wise, housing-wise. Now the pain is hurting everybody. All the poor people getting hurt. Now all of these policies are affecting y'all, everybody. Okay? That's how selective justice works. It never stays selective forever. Eventually it reaches everybody. That's why I don't believe this conversation is really about guilt. I don't want white people to feel guilty for being white. I don't care. That would accomplish absolutely nothing. I want people to become aware of something they may never have considered before. There is a difference. Awareness asks questions. Guilt shuts conversations down. I want conversations. I want people to examine the examples. I want people to look at Jake Lang. He's very confident running around this country saying, we only want white people in America. He's very confident saying that. Who's encouraging him with this confidence? Who's encouraging him to do this? He only gets reinforcement from other people, and that's where he gets his confidence from, his entitlement from. Because there's other people that are feeding this entitlement. I want people to ask themselves one question. Were these three men, given the same amount of grace? Not the same legal charges, not the same facts, not the same evidence, the same grace. The same public sympathy, same political protection, the same willingness from influential people to defend them. Because that's where I believe privilege often becomes visible. Not before someone crosses the line, afterwards. Afterwards. Privilege becomes visible after someone has crossed the line. Look at Ken Paxton. He is allowed to run for the U.S. Senate. Look at all the grace they done gave him. Look at all the grace they done gave Donald Trump. Look at all the grace. When everybody has to decide whether they're going to defend the person or defend the principle, that's the choice every political movement eventually has to face. Do you defend people? Do you defend the principle? Because sometimes those two things are in conflict. That's why I believe leadership matters. Leadership isn't measured by how well you defend people who agree with you. Leadership is measured by whether you're willing to tell your own supporters when they're wrong. That's hard. It's supposed to be hard. Character is almost always revealed when telling the truth costs you something. That's true for presidents, Congress, media personality. That's true for everybody. I don't expect everybody watching this video to agree with me. I don't believe it. In fact, I'd be surprised if they did. I don't give a fuck. I stand on my own, 10 toes all the time. People always say, you're the only person that believes that, TPP. I don't care. I believe it. But I hope this video causes people to start treating the phrase white privilege like a slogan and stop treating it like a slogan and start asking a different question about it. Who receives the most grace? Because after watching this country for years, I have reached the conclusion that grace is one of the clearest forms of privilege that exist. When someone knows there are influential people ready to defend them, raise money for them, interview them, celebrate them, or eventually pardon them, that knowledge changes their behavior if they know they have grace. That's my opinion. That's why you have Karens, white Karen women in the park screaming, he's touching me, they're touching me, they're hurting me. And the person may be all the way over there, but they're on the phone with the police saying, he's touching me, he's threatening me, he's doing all this, because they understand that they have white privilege. They understand that they have white privilege. It changes how much risk people are willing to take. It changes how comfortable people become pushing boundaries. And eventually, I believe, changes what they expect. That's how privilege becomes entitlement. And once entitlement takes hold, accountability starts becoming optional. No democracy can survive very long if enough people believe accountability is optional. That's why the conversation matters to me. Not because I want to win an argument, but because I want America to become a country where the law is respected, accountability is expected, and grace is extended consistently instead of selectively. I don't know if we ever completely get there, but I know we'll never get there if we're unwilling to have this conversation about privilege and entitlement, okay? I want to end this conversation by asking you to do something that I had to do myself. I want you to stop reacting to the words white. Stop reacting to the words white and privilege. And start paying attention to the patterns. That's what changed my mind. It wasn't one article, it wasn't a television interview, statistic, or criminal case. It was years of watching similar situations play out over and over again. I watched who was described as a patriot. I watched who was described as a criminal. I watched who became a symbol. I watched who became expendable, who was given grace, who was given political protection. And eventually I realized I wasn't looking at isolated events anymore. I was looking at a pattern. You may look at the exact same pattern and reach a different conclusion. That's your right. But I hope you'll actually examine it before dismissing it. Go watch Jake Lang's interviews. Watch how he carries himself. Watch how he talks. Watch how certain and confident he is. Then ask yourself whether you think that level of confidence developed by accident. Go back and look at Chud the Barber. Ask yourself what convinced him that he could continue pushing boundaries the way he did. Then compare those examples to Moye, the black BLM activist. Don't compare personalities. Don't compare political beliefs. Compare the response. The response to Moye, the response to Chud the Builder, the response to Jake Lang. Compare the amount of grace that they were given and Moye wasn't. That's a comparison I made. That's how I reached my conclusion. Not just those three men, but plenty of people. Now, maybe you'll watch those same examples and completely disagree with me. That's okay. Look at the grace that the Asian man, I forgot his name, Asian guy who shot the young guy in the back. Look at all the grace in the world they gave that man. They didn't give that boy any kind of grace, but they gave it all to the Asian guy. I'm not asking you to take my opinion. I'm asking you to do your own homework, because one of the biggest problems in America today is that too many people let political people do their thinking for them. If you're a Democrat, Democrats tell you what to think. Republicans, they tell you what to think. Cable news tell you what. Social media influencers, all these people tell you what to think instead of doing your own research. I don't want that. I want people to become independent thinkers. I want people to ask difficult questions. That's real intellectual honesty when you do your own homework. I criticize Democrats, I criticize Republicans, and I'll continue to do both because my loyalty isn't to a political party. My loyalty is to consistency, behavior consistency. If I criticize one side for excusing bad behavior, then I have to criticize the other side. Otherwise, I'm just not another partisan hack pretending to care about accountability. That's not who I want to be. At the end of the day, I don't think this country needs more outrage. We got plenty of outrage. I think this country needs some accountability, consistency. If we're going to defend accountability, defend it when it's politically inconvenient. Defend it when it's not on your side. If we're going to defend equal justice, then defend it when someone on your side is standing in front of the judge. If we're going to talk about privilege, then let's stop pretending it only exists when it's politically useful to acknowledge it. That's my challenge to everybody watching this video. Don't take my word for it, Jake Lang's word for it, Donald Trump's word for it, CNN's word for it, Fox News' word for it. Watch, compare, think, then reach your own conclusion. I reached mine. After years of watching these stories unfold, I believe privilege is real. Privilege is real. I believe grace is distributed unevenly across this country. I believe repeated grace can create entitlement. Every time you get grace for doing something, you create entitlement. And I believe entitlement becomes dangerous when powerful people continue rewarding it instead of confronting it. You don't have to agree with me, but I hope you're at least willing to ask yourself the question about it. I asked it at the beginning of this video, who gets the most grace after crossing the line? Because I believe the answer to that question tells us a great deal about America, about politics, and about ourselves. So, if you like my video and you like the content, please like, share, subscribe. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I might be back tomorrow morning with another video, and otherwise I'll be here at 10 o'clock. But I appreciate you guys coming out and watching my video. And let me read hold on. Let me look at the comment section. There's no such thing as white privilege. Yes, it is. If you're black, then you know what white privilege is. It is. It is what it is. Chud sucks. Chud the barber sucks. Well, he does, I guess. Trying to convince the internet. That's wild. Why are you over here trying to convince the internet? Goofy logic. Okay. Pedo Chud. I don't want to hear about Pedo Chud. Who cares? Okay. Chai is a hero. Okay. Chai is a flexibility bandit. So he's a flexibility bandit. So go ahead and admire the guy if you want to. Jake Lang isn't white, he's Jewish. Oh, well, that's crazy. Yes. It's amazing. This is what I also wanted to say. You people understand when a fag calls a fag a fag. I'm not calling anybody a name. I'm not saying any of that. When a Jewish person calls somebody a Jew, or Mexican, or spick, or nigga, you understand that those people, when you're a Jewish person, you can call another person a Jew or blah blah blah. Or two women call each other bitches, you can call each other bitches. But y'all act like y'all don't seem to understand that you can't. You're not a black person, so you can't call another black person the N-word. That's something y'all seem to not get. You understand it when people tell you not to call people kikes and Jews and all those. You understand that you're not supposed to say those words because those are words that only they can say to each other. You understand that. But the only reason why you want to say the word the N-word and thinking it's free speech is because you're a harmful human being. You're less than a human being. Because you understand that. Because a lot of y'all won't get on the internet saying spick and kike and all. You won't get on there and say those things. I'm not calling anybody any of those things. I'm saying those are profane words for other people. But you choose to say the N-word because you want to be the hateful human being that you are. And that tells me that you're a hateful human being inside. But hey, I digress. So if you like my content, please hit the like, share, and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with another video. Please and thank you. I appreciate everybody that came over. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all of it. All of it. I'll see you in the next video. I appreciate you guys.